We are standing by today for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's daily address on the federal government's COVID-19 response. It's expected to start a little bit earlier today, probably in the next minute or so, in his usual location, back to his usual location today, just outside his home at Rideau Cottage. And we're also expecting him today to talk about a federal-provincial agreement that has been negotiated for a number of weeks now to try and find a way to top up wages for essential workers. Those can be essential workers at long-term care homes or essential workers in any other part of the economy where people might be going to work in spite of the pandemic, finding ways to increase their salaries, to make it more beneficial for those people to go to work, to thank them for the work they're doing and to keep them in those jobs. Specifically, the Prime Minister has talked about the people making less than $2,500 a month. And yes, that would, of course, also apply to long-term care homes. Care homes really, as we've been talking about since the beginning of this, the epicenter of the pandemic here in Canada, where the vast majority of Canadians have died, and that is particularly in Quebec and Ontario. Just earlier today, the Minister of National Defence talked about the number of soldiers now deployed into long-term care homes in both Ontario and Quebec, more than 1,000 of them in some 25 long-term care homes in Quebec and 5 here in Ontario. So this is, again, an agreement that has been reached between the federal government and provinces. From what we understand, it will be a fairly flexible deal, allowing provinces to decide just who is an essential worker and who will need this kind of benefit, wage top-up, if you will. And here now, the Prime Minister of Canada with more details for us.
I want to begin with a few words about the terrible helicopter crash that claimed the lives of 6 armed forces members last week. Yesterday, I attended a ceremony in their honor. I was grateful to have an opportunity to pay my respects. I got to speak with mothers, fathers, and stepfathers, grandparents, friends, sons and daughters, fiancés, partners, and loved ones. All of them were heartbroken, but all of them were also immensely proud of the life of service chosen by their loved one, as are we all. We will never forget their service. They will live on in our hearts, and I know the thoughts of all Canadians are with the families and loved ones who are going through an incredibly difficult time. We stand with them, and we will continue to stand with them. As time and time again, members of the Canadian Armed Forces step up to help those in need, whether it be as a part of a NATO mission in Europe or in the wake of a natural disaster here in Canada. They're always there for us, eager to help, ready to serve, and this pandemic is no exception. When our government received requests for assistance from Ontario and Quebec, our men and women in uniform once again answered the call. In Ontario, 265 CAF members have now been deployed to 5 long-term care facilities. They're supporting our frontline workers, caring for our parents and grandparents, and bringing some comfort to their families. If you've lost a loved one in one of those facilities, or if you have a loved one that you haven't been able to visit for weeks, you're worried sick about what tomorrow will bring, and you hope that they're getting the care they deserve. Seeing our CAF members offer their help and talents during these uncertain times is a reassuring sight for many of these families. So I want to thank all of those who've been deployed and all the frontline workers who continue to work harder than ever to keep our seniors safe. À l'échelle du pays, environ 1200 rangers canadiens ont été déployés pour aider à limiter la propagation du virus en plusieurs régions, dont 200 rangers au Nunavik et en Basse-Côte-Nord. Et à travers le Québec, on compte maintenant plus de 670 membres des Forces armées canadiennes.
CAF personnel in 20 long-term care homes with 350 additional members to provide support. We expect that next week there will be a total of 1,350 military personnel as part of that operation to provide support in 25 facilities. Long-term care homes are the facilities that have been hardest hit by COVID-19, and our members are there to provide assistance. They are now looking after our parents and our grandparents. They are supporting the people who are there, and including nurses and frontline workers who are working very long hours in very, very difficult conditions. So I want to take a moment to thank all our military personnel that have stepped up to lend a hand. I also want to recognize the incredible work that our frontline workers have been carrying out since the beginning of this crisis, not only in long-term care homes, but elsewhere. You are a source of motivation for all of us. You're looking after our parents, you're looking after the ill, and you're taking care of us. You are fighting the good fight against COVID-19 and have been since the beginning of this crisis. And you deserve more than just our gratitude. You deserve to be properly paid for the essential work that you are doing. Today, I am able to announce that we have reached an agreement with all the provinces and territories with a view to topping up the wages of essential workers. We are now finalizing the details with some provinces, but I want to point out that this is a joint effort. All the premiers agree. We must support our essential workers. And I want to thank them for having shown a team spirit in addressing this issue. Now, more than ever, we need those workers, and we will be there for them. The governments of the provinces and territories will determine exactly which workers will receive the wage top-up. But this is what we're going to do. If you are risking your health in order to get through this crisis and you're receiving minimum wage, you deserve to earn more.
Today I can announce that we have an agreement with all the provinces and territories to provide a wage top-up for essential workers, for Canadians who are being called to go to work every day, for Canadians who are providing us with essential services so we can continue to keep our families safe and healthy. Right now, we're finalizing the details with the last provinces, and I want to underscore that this has been a truly collaborative effort. Premiers from across the country all agree that we need to support our essential workers, and I thank the premiers for the continued Team Canada approach. We're relying on these workers now more than ever, and we will be there to support them. It will be up to each province and territory to determine who exactly qualifies for this wage increase, but the bottom line is this. If you're risking your health to keep this country moving and you're making minimum wage, you deserve a raise. I want to close by noting that today, Buddhists in Canada and around the world will mark Vesak, their most important festival. While this year's celebrations will be a bit different, the Buddha's message of peace, selfless service, and compassion to those in need is more important than ever. I want to wish a happy and peaceful Vesak to all those celebrating. I'm now happy to take people's questions.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions par le téléphone aujourd'hui. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. Première question, Catherine Lévesque, La Presse canadienne. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good morning, Mr.
Comment
Trudeau.
expliquer que ça ait pris
How can you explain the fact that it took such a long time to agree with the provinces on the wage top-up? They are our guardian angels, and have you agreed on a specific figure, $4 or $5 more per hour, say? Well, once again, we know that the provinces are facing different circumstances right across the country because of COVID-19, and they are also taking different approaches towards the work of their essential workers. So as a federal government, we wanted to help the provinces with 3/4 of the funding that they will now have available to them to support their essential workers. For the federal government, we're talking about $4 million for essential workers right across the country, but the provinces will be the ones determining exactly how and who will receive that funding. A follow-up, Catherine? Yes, thank you. So I understand there won't be a consistent wage top-up across the country. Now, your science advisor has criticized the lack of a clear plan in Quebec, even though it's already started to relax the lockdown. Well, we do recognize that we need to do much more in terms of testing in the coming months in order to reopen the economy and to keep Canadians safe. All the provinces and territories must do more. We have seen a significant improvement, even just in the last few days, including in Quebec. And at the federal level, we will continue to work collaboratively with the provinces to improve the testing. We know we have to do more testing, and we will continue to be there to support the provinces and territories to do more.
Next question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Ryan Tumulty, National Post. Line open.
Yeah, good morning, Prime Minister. I'm wondering if you can give us an idea of what this program will cost the federal government overall. And given that you seem to be leaving this up to the provinces, like what sort of guidelines have you given them about how to spend those federal dollars?
We see across the country people working on the front lines in essential services, in our seniors' care systems, in our long-term care, in our healthcare systems, and elsewhere, who are making very low wages while doing extraordinarily important work. That's why we announced a number of days ago that we wanted to move forward with a top-up to be delivered by the provinces to those workers who needed that extra support. We put forward around $4 billion from the federal government to be matched, 3/4 from the federal government, 1/4 from the provincial government, on helping those workers right across the country. But because of the variance across the country, both of the COVID-19 situation and of a delivery of essential services, including healthcare, we felt that it was best that provinces move forward in choosing exactly how they can best help the workers who are doing such important work right across the country. This is another great example of how the federal government and the provinces and territories have been able to come together, collaborate, work together to support Canadians through this extremely difficult time.
On follow-up, Ryan?
Yeah, what about non-medical workers, I guess, people who work in grocery stores and delivery drivers? Some of those workers, like you say, are working minimum wage. Are they going to be eligible for this top-up?
As I said, those are determinations to be made by the provinces. I know a number of provinces had already put out lists of workers that they considered to be essential, and many of them are drawing from those lists in terms of who gets the top-up. We have confidence that the provinces will determine exactly how best to help Canadians in this time. The federal government wanted to be there, and we know that offering this money to workers right across the country will make a big difference, and we trust the provinces to make sure that people who need it gets this help.
Thank you. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Émilie Bergeron, Agence QMI. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. With respect to today's announcement about the wage top-up, this is something people have been waiting for a long time, but you're not giving any specific numbers. Can you tell us exactly what you think the federal contribution will cost? And specifically for Quebec, will there be any compensation through a Quebec program? Well, we have signed agreements with all the provinces and territories, or are in the process of doing so, and all the provinces must work together in this context. So for the federal government, we're talking about an investment of $4 billion for all essential workers across the country. We will be supporting about 3/4 of the cost of the province's programs. In the case of Quebec, we have reached an agreement, and I know that they are happy that the federal government will be there to help their essential workers. A follow-up? Yes. With respect to the CAF personnel in long-term care homes, we know that there was a problem with medical personnel going from one facility to another. Now, will they be assigned to one facility only? Well, I do not have any specific information to share with you on that, but I do know that CAF personnel are taking all possible precautions to ensure that they remain safe and, of course, that they can ensure the safety of the people they are serving. And that's why the CAF personnel are being assigned to specific long-term care homes, because we want to help and not run the risk of spreading the virus even more.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Teresa Wright, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Earlier this week, the Chinese embassy tweeted that the N95 masks, which were rejected by Canada last month, were the result of a contractual issue that has now been resolved. Your Deputy Prime Minister and Health Minister said that they would look into it, but have yet to respond to explain what happened. Was there a contract problem that led to 1 million masks from China being rejected? What was the issue, and has it been resolved?
We have, over the past weeks, received millions upon millions of items of PPE from around the world, including from China. Over the course of this time, there have been a small number that have been not to the levels that Canadians expected. We are continuing to follow up and work on it to make sure that the equipment that we deliver to our frontline workers, to our healthcare workers across this country, is at Canadian standards. We will be receiving flights of PPE from China and other places almost daily over the coming weeks. We know that we are needing to ensure enough high-quality equipment for Canadians right across the country, and we're continuing to do just that.
For a number of weeks now, we have received some 20 plane loads full of PPE, primarily from China, but also from other parts of the world. And we know that with the millions and millions of PPE that we've received, there is a small percentage that did not meet our expectations and Canadian standards, since we must provide this equipment to our frontline workers. And we're setting that equipment aside, and we're working to ensure that we can receive other PPE that meets our standards. But we will continue to receive plane loads of PPE every single day in the coming week, and we will have enough high-quality PPE for all Canadians.
Suivi, Teresa?
Thank you. People working in grocery stores and on farms and in long-term care facilities have often come from marginalized populations, and now they're considered essential workers. Are we placing too high a burden on marginalized people in this pandemic?
I think one of the things that we're seeing through this pandemic is that there are people who are tremendously economically vulnerable and vulnerable in other ways in our society who are extremely important to the functioning of our society. As we've made it through this pandemic so far, we've been focusing on supporting these most vulnerable people, and this top-up for essential workers delivered by the provinces is another piece of support for people who need it in order to get through this time as best we can as a country. We know, however, that once we get through this in the months and years to come, we're also going to have reflections about how we manage and how we maintain our long-term care facilities, how we support essential workers who are very low paid, how we move forward as a society to make sure that our vulnerable are properly taken care of and properly rewarded for the important work they do. Je pense que
I think we will all be reflecting in the coming months and years on how we can ensure that the people carrying out that essential work are properly paid. They are economically vulnerable, and so that is certainly something we will have to reflect on over the longer term. In the short term, however, we are supporting everyone we can, trying to meet their needs with various measures, including the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, but also with what we're announcing today, a wage top-up for essential workers. So we have to come through this, but of course we will have a lot to think about as a society in the coming years to see how we can improve the lot of some.
Prime Minister. Kevin Gallagher with CTV News. Cargill, meatpacking in High River, Alberta, the workers have gone back. Many are still very concerned about the safety of their work conditions, but also outside of the factory in their communities. Many are experiencing racism and discrimination because they work at the plant. Many of them, of course, are new Canadians. You have said that worker safety really falls under provincial jurisdiction, but at what point does the federal government have to step in to ensure worker safety at Cargill and other food processing facilities across the country?
I think one of the things that this crisis has shown us is various points of vulnerability, both in our supply chains, but also in terms of people who work in jobs that we find extremely important right across the country for feeding Canadians, for allowing our economy to run. There are obviously going to be many reflections we're going to have as a society in the coming months and years on how we make sure that the country is fair and the country is supportive and protecting everyone in the important work that they do. In the meantime, we will continue to work with the provinces on assuring both continued flow of food supply chains, but also ensuring that there is proper support for the people who work in these industries and in this processing and in agriculture. That was part of what our announcement yesterday, which was a first and initial installment, our first investment in supporting agricultural workers and producers to be able to be safe while they do such important work for Canadians.
We are talking about like the largest outbreak in North America here. So how do you evaluate the provincial regulators here? You know, has the province done enough, in your view, to keep those workers safe?
I think there are a lot of questions being asked of how various provinces have handled different aspects of this pandemic. I will be talking with the premiers tonight to offer again in so many different ways how the federal government can help. What we just announced today as a top-up for essential workers is a great example of the federal government and the provincial governments working together on protecting Canadians. Obviously, there are always things to learn, always things that we need to do better. And as the provinces look to step up and do more and do differently and do better, the federal government will be there to support them.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Mathieu Goyer de Radio-Canada. Je reviens
Radio
sur
Canada, I'd like to come back to today's announcement about the wage top-up. Is this not proof that the other response benefit that you brought in was too generous? Well, we will be seeing some numbers tomorrow about job losses in April. There are millions of Canadians out there who lost their paycheck, who lost their job, and who would not have the ability to buy groceries for their family or pay their rent. The emergency benefit was there, is there for millions of Canadians to provide the support they need at a time when we must all pretty much stay home. This was an essential measure, and this is an example of how Canadians support each other at difficult times. And at the same time, we also know that there are workers who carry out essential work for our society who deserve a wage top-up. And that's why we're very pleased to have worked with the provinces to deliver support for those workers. I'd like to come back to testing. Other than the concerns about the scientific advisor that were raised, is it not necessary to have a consistent approach to testing and ensure they have the right tools to follow the results of that testing? Well, I think the provinces are looking at very different circumstances right across the country. So a federal program that would be applied consistently across the board would not be the right solution. We are there to support the provinces and help them with resources and material, help them to establish better plans so that we can move forward with enough testing to try and reopen the economy while still keeping Canadians safe and secure. And we will continue to work hard. There is always room for improvement, but we will be there to support them and to work with them in this unprecedented situation.
Good morning, Prime Minister Salima Shifty, CBC. As a lot of governments are looking towards recovery from this, the economic recovery here in Canada, how will you be able to help the Canadian economy get back on its feet from this, reduce spending, and yet also respect some of the promises you made in the election, some big-ticket items like pharmacare and infrastructure spending?
Obviously, this situation has become the new priority that we have to deal with. It is an economic impact, the likes of which hasn't been seen in over 70 years on Canadians from coast to coast to coast, on families, on sectors, on businesses. And the measures we're put forward that are historic and without precedent in terms of supporting families and supporting workers and supporting communities and supporting small businesses. These are the things that are going to help us get through. And our priority right now is helping people hold on while we have to stay isolated because of COVID-19, and then start restarting carefully the economy in a gradual and progressive way with the right measures in place. Once we get through this, there will be plenty of time to talk about what the longer term looks like, what the future of Canada looks like, what is needed for various sectors, for various Canadians. We've seen a whole bunch of new needs popped up that we had not paid much attention to over the past years, like the plight of most vulnerable workers. I mean, we had, as a government, invested massively in reducing poverty over the past 5 years. We've seen over 1 million people lifted out of poverty, but there's obviously much more to do, and we're going to continue to focus on that. I think there is going to be time to talk about long-term plans as we get through this. Right now, our focus is on getting Canadians through this.
Right, but other governments are also focused on recovery and what they will do as part of that recovery. The UK, for example, its climate advisors are saying that all recovery will have a green focus. How they have a net zero by 2050 commitment, just as your government does. So how will the recovery take into account your climate change promises in the last election?
I think one of the things that we're very much thinking about is how do we build back better? How do we look at what this pandemic has challenged us with, what it has highlighted around needs or gaps in Canada, and how do we look to rebuild and recover in a way that advances us in the right direction. Obviously, less pollution, greener outcomes are going to be a part of it. More digital, more connected is going to be a part of it. Better supports for vulnerable Canadians and more equality across this country needs to be part of it as well. These are principles that we're looking at right now and reflecting on how we go forward. And we're going to continue to.
Prime Minister Janet Silver, Global News. Yesterday, Green Party parliamentary leader Elizabeth May said the oil sector in Canada is basically dead. And the Bloc leader went on to say putting more money into that business is a very bad idea. I'm just wondering if you would share this assessment, and will your government give more money to this industry given the opposition and given how low oil prices are and it's expected to continue for the unseeable future?
I don't share that assessment. I know that if we are to move forward in transforming our economy towards lower emissions and cleaner processes, workers and innovators in Alberta and across the country in the energy sector are going to be an essential part of that transformation, as we move forward towards a different energy mix, as we move forward to lower fossil fuel emissions, lower greenhouse gas emissions, we need the innovation, the hard work, and the vision and the creativity of people working right now in the energy sector. We need to support Albertans and other people working in the energy sector through this incredible difficult time as families, as workers, as communities, not just because that's what we do as Canadians, but because we need their capacity to innovate and figure out how we're going to move forward towards our greater, greener goals. We can't do it without them, and that's why we're going to keep supporting them in the right ways. Okay. Je suis pas d'accord.
No, I don't agree with that assessment. We know that the only way that we can move forward as a country is to have the energy industry as a partner, to create long-term solutions, to reduce our emissions, and to innovate in the area of new technology. For all of that, we need innovative and hard-working industries, such as the ones in our energy sector. We cannot meet our targets unless we have partners in the energy sector who will be working with us to find the right solutions and transform that energy sector. So we need those families, those workers, those communities in Alberta and elsewhere. They are part of the solution, and that's why we have to support them. We will support them not only because that's what we have to do as Canadians, we're always there for each other, but we're going to support them because they are essential allies in transforming our economy and a better future for all of us.
You indicated that you would look at other nations, for example, France and Australia, and what they are doing when it comes to tech giants like Google and Facebook being forced to share ad revenue with Canadian news content providers. Given how many news content providers are struggling, especially in small towns, and in some cases closing, and how vital those are to those small towns, you said you would address the matter. I'm just wondering, are you prepared to do so now, especially at such a vital time for truth and news?
It is extremely important that we support our news sector because Canadians need the information to keep them safe, to plan for their futures, to lean on each other. We need the media now during a crisis more than we ever have. And that's why, as a government that has put forward significant measures to support news media, we're going to continue to work to do just that. I can assure you that Minister Guilbeault is working very hard and very closely with allies around the world to see what they're doing and with the sector here in Canada to ensure that Canadians get top quality information, that decision makers and politicians continue to be held to account, and that we continue to make decisions based on facts and a shared understanding of the reality we're facing. The work that the media does is essential. We will continue to support it. Les médias et les réseaux d'information
The
sont plus
news media and
importants
information networks are more important now than ever before. We know that having access to concrete and accurate information during this pandemic is extremely important for citizens who want to make the right decisions. We also have to ensure the accountability of decision makers across the country. We need to ensure that Canadians are properly informed about everything that's happening in this country and around the world, and that's why we will always support our information and media networks. Our government has already invested money to help them through difficult times, and we will continue to do that. Minister Guilbeault is now working with the media and our international partners to see what can be done, because we know that this will always be a priority in Canada when it comes to ensuring that the information industry is there for us.
Merci.
All right, that is the Prime Minister of Canada giving us his daily briefing on how his government is responding to the pandemic. In about half an hour's time, he will appear in front of the COVID-19 committee, the virtual committee, and is expected to answer some questions there. So we'll bring you some of that as well. But today, an announcement that the federal government has reached an agreement with provinces and territories, a cost-sharing agreement to bump up wages for quote-unquote essential workers in this country. $3 billion coming from Ottawa to make that happen, and another $1 billion expected to be put on the table by the provinces. Let's bring in my colleagues, the host of Power and Politics, Vashi Capellas, and the CBC's Catherine Cullen, both here listening with me. So this is very significant. Vashi, I know you've been tracking it closely because it was not necessarily the easiest negotiation between the provinces to get to this point.
Yeah, no, not at all, Rosie. And it took a number of weeks for those negotiations to end up where they are today. And that is, as you mentioned, with an agreement in principle. I would note that some of the details, it sounds like the Prime Minister said, with some provinces, there are a few, I guess, left in which the details have to be worked out. But the agreement in principle is there. The price tag is a big one, as you mentioned, $3 billion. The Prime Minister says provinces will contribute $1 billion additional dollars to that. A lot of questions remain, though, about how exactly it will work, and that's largely a function of the fact that most of that will be up to the province itself. So, for example, who is deemed an essential worker, that'll be up to the province. And then the way in which the money, I guess, the amount of the top-up. And that was a bit confusing to me because the announcement of the program initially from the Prime Minister was that anyone who makes under $2,500 would get some sort of a top-up. I know from speaking with various premiers that there were concerns at that point about a lack of flexibility. So, for example, in Nova Scotia, essential workers there, the Premier said, already made that amount of money. So they didn't want to not qualify for it. So I'm curious to see now. I think the follow-up questions should be directed definitely at the provinces. Who exactly will get this in your province and how much will they get? How will they have to qualify for it? I thought the question also to the Prime Minister about like what kind of strings, I'm paraphrasing, but what kind of strings are attached to this? Are there sort of a basic, is there a basic level that provinces or set of requirements that provinces have to meet in order to qualify for that money? He didn't really give a specific answer, so I am sort of looking for the devil in the details. Is it just sort of a handover of money? Will provinces have full jurisdiction over those decisions, or will there be some sort of parameters set by the federal government? I'd imagine there would be some because it's a huge chunk of change, but definitely that's where I'm interested going forward. Just quickly before I turn it back to you, the other thing that really stood out to me was jumping off a political conversation yesterday. Elizabeth May, leader of the Green Party, or not leader of the Green Party, former leader, I should say, and Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc Québécois, both coming out and saying oil is dead, the oil sands are over. The Prime Minister really rebuked that statement today, I thought, which was very interesting, and sort of set some groundwork, I think, for what may be additional help for the oil sector, though the sector is anxious to hear what that help might be, and certainly politicians out west have been saying, hey, where is this extra stuff you've been promising now since the end of March? It did sound like the Prime Minister was not holding back at all from the potential for that. And he certainly said very unequivocally that he disagreed with the assessment put forward by those other politicians.
Yeah, another good point to point out. I will also say that the provinces, back to the top-up issue, the provinces have actually done a bit of that work on their own. My producer Phil put together a handy list for me. So Quebec has done that, Ontario has done it, Saskatchewan, Alberta, but this is all concentrated on long-term care workers. And I think, Vashi, all your questions to the provinces will be interesting, Catherine, because this money could go to anyone they deem to be an essential worker who's not getting paid enough, and is potentially, putting their health at risk by going to work every day.
Yeah, I thought some of the most poignant questions, certainly during that Q&A, had to do with the vulnerability of the people who are actually going to be receiving this money. It is something the Prime Minister has talked about before, that not only has this highlighted the fact that the people in these long-term care centers, our grandparents, our parents, aunts, uncles, that they are vulnerable, but also that the people caring for them are vulnerable as well. And I think it's been acknowledged that this is a situation that needs to be looked at well beyond the scope of this pandemic. I think if you just take a step back at both of the announcements, looking at both of the announcements today, both what the Prime Minister announced and the announcement earlier today that members of the Canadian Forces, a greater number, are going to be in more long-term care facilities in Quebec. There are also members of the Canadian Forces at long-term care facilities in Ontario. I think it just once again underlines, points out the fragility of this system. The Prime Minister said a few weeks ago that this whole thing was to some extent, it points to a failure, right? He says soldiers shouldn't be taking care of our seniors. And I think everything we're seeing today, it is being celebrated as a Team Canada effort, everyone coming together on these negotiations. But we all also, I think, have to keep in mind the fact that there is a very big problem here on many fronts, not only the people working in these facilities, but of course, the incredible number of deaths that we're seeing in all of them. And a great deal more work than this is going to be needed to address that.
Yeah, I should say in Quebec, they gave a $4 per hour pay hike for workers in private long-term care homes. But to give you a sense of what they're actually making, it's about $24 an hour to attract new workers. And given the amount of work that they were having to do, and because there are not enough people, so the number of patients and people they're caring for, you could argue that's still not enough. And I thought too, the Prime Minister had some interesting things to say about how this pandemic has exposed the way we treat the people that we rely on every single day, maybe without always realizing, how much we rely on them. There will be questions, though, about not only how the provinces do this, Vashi, but also then a little bit like the Andrew Scheer conversation around CERB, how it gets pulled back. Because if in, however long the program lasts, let's say, 4 months, how do you then go back to paying someone who you've prioritized as an essential worker, you've said deserves more than minimum wage, and now we turn the corner on the pandemic and suddenly this person is expected to exist on a lower salary? I just wonder if it's going to lead to a bigger conversation about how people are paid in this country, and maybe for better even.
Yeah, I think that conversation is happening, and it will persist well after this is done, for sure. I think there's two parts to that question. The first is, so what do they do with the actual program, and is that going to be left up to provinces as well? How will that relationship move going forward, and what happens, just like as you said, with the CERB or the wage subsidy program? I mean, these are big decisions that governments are going to have to make pretty shortly, actually. The second part of it is not just around, I think, the wage itself, but I understand that the money is funneled through to people who work in these scenarios, in grocery stores or in long-term care homes. But I think part of that conversation that will exist after this is to, the fact that the federal government here and provincial governments are essentially having to pay workers in privately run places, whether it be a grocery store, whether it be a long-term care home. I think there are some, difficult questions, maybe even now, that taxpayers may have. These people deserve more money, certainly, and I know that market conditions are different depending on the business, but it is interesting that we're using tax money to pay people more in a privately run home when there are so many questions about the way in which those homes are being run by those private companies. And if, in fact, those companies are taking home huge profits, and I'm not saying all of them are, but if they are, you have to wonder why they aren't paying their employees more as well.
Yeah, okay. I'll leave it there with both of you just for a moment, if you don't mind, Vashi and Catherine, to bring in another voice, Dr. Gray Moonen. He's a family medicine resident with the University of Toronto, and he's been trying to highlight some of the staff, some of these people who support doctors and nurses, keep hospitals going, and he's in Toronto. And we tried to talk to you, Doctor, last week and didn't get to you, so I'm glad we got back to you today. First of all, just tell me why you wanted to do this, because this is sort of the people that the Prime Minister today is talking about, these frontline people who aren't doctors and nurses, all the people supporting you.
Yeah, I think the public is rightly galvanized behind physicians and nurses as true frontline workers. We're right there with patients, but there's a lot of other frontline workers making genuine sacrifices that are kind of just quietly working away in the hospital and maybe a little bit invisible, but they really enable the ecosystem of the hospital to really work. And these are the people that the Prime Minister has started to recognize. These are the janitors, the baristas, the personal support workers, cleaning staff, cleaning our scrubs, making rooms clean, delivering food. So there's a lot of these perhaps underappreciated and under-recognized folks in the hospital that they really enable doctors to do their jobs and nurses to do their jobs.
So keep people safe. Sorry to interrupt you. So you decided to. We were just showing some of the photos. So I just wanted people to know that those were your photos. That you've found a way to try and highlight them and pay tribute to them.
Yeah, you know what? I just wasn't hearing a lot of recognition for those folks. Like I said, doctors and nurses were getting a lot of credit, and I think it was very deserved credit. But I wanted to put a name and a face to some of these other folks to really recognize them and thank them for their very important contributions, their sacrifices, and simply saying, I see you, I recognize you, and thank you for what you're doing. And it was a very easy thing for me to do and kind of low-hanging fruit, but I thought it was a good way to, drive a sense of camaraderie and unity on the front lines, especially when there was a lot of uncertainty at the beginning of this. So I started this kind of mid-March when things were really in question. So I hope it's provided some level of recognition and sense of unity.
Well, I love it. I think it's such a great idea and so good of you to do. You would recognize, though, I guess, as the Prime Minister and the provinces have today, that a lot of these people are not paid enough. And I just wonder if you have thoughts about that and whether you think that's something that might change in a bigger way over time now.
Yeah, my initial goals of this were not, political in any way, sure. But these are folks that I work with and that in the hospital we all work with and we all know. And we, I think, had a recognition that they were oftentimes marginalized. They don't have the same salaries as other people accepting risk. They don't have hazard pay, and they're still exposed quite regularly. And unfortunately, they're from marginalized communities a lot of the times, and they don't have that sense of empowerment or sense of value to really speak up because they're just not empowered. So I think this pandemic has really highlighted what we value in society and how we value people. And I'm very encouraged at what the Prime Minister and the Ford government in Ontario starting to give some of that pandemic pay for people. I think that hopefully in the future, one of the silver linings of this can be further recognition and appreciation of those folks. And a lot of times the way we do that in our society is through, security and more money and more appreciation. So I'm very hopeful that will actually happen. And I think it's a very positive thing for everyone, right?
Dr. Moonen, how are you holding up? I don't know what your experience has been through this, whether you've had to treat people.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I mean, I think I'm as well as everyone can be. I mean, we're feeling well trained. We have appropriate PPE, at least at my institution. We have good, transparent leadership. I've been working on obstetrics and doing urgent care and family medicine and COVID clinics and all that. So I've been busy, but I think my colleagues and I, as long as we're doing it safely, I think that to be honest, we feel a really strong sense of purpose in what we're doing. And in a certain way, at least personally, I feel like I signed up for this when I went into medicine, and I feel like I can help a lot of people out right now. So I'm happy to be doing what I'm doing, and to be honest, I personally wouldn't be doing anything else. So I'm happy to be doing it and, accepting some risk, but I think there's a good reason for it.
Well, Dr. Moonen, we wanted to talk to you because you were paying tribute to some people who needed that, but let us also thank you at this moment for all your hard work and all your colleagues. We really appreciate it. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate it. You too. Take care.
Okay, that's Dr. Graeme Moonen, a family medicine resident with the University of Toronto. And I'll tweet out the link to his photos of all those people helping him do his job as a doctor at the University of Toronto. I want to turn to another story that we are tracking, and I'll get Vashi and Catherine to weigh in after this interview too, because the other thing we are still waiting to hear more about from the government, the Prime Minister said to expect something within days, is an announcement around seniors in this country. Many of you have emailed and tweeted me about the fact that you need a little extra support too. The Prime Minister has indicated that is to come, but we wanted to reach out and talk to someone who is waiting to hear more, and that is Don Robertson. He's 82 years old and he lives in Vancouver. He's a retired United Church minister, and he says that this has exposed, indeed, the neglect of seniors and that there are more things the government can do to help them. Don, good to see you. Nice of you to make the time.
Thank you, Rosemary. Good to be with you.
Great. So tell me, first of all, tell me how you're doing. I think it's you and your wife.
That's right. Well, we're doing very well. Actually, we've been quite busy during this time. We're glad about Zoom. I continue to be involved at First United Church in the downtown east side. And we have committee meetings with Zoom, and we have happy hour with friends at 5 o'clock over Zoom, and meet with the grandkids in Montreal with Zoom, and doing some writing and preparing for a course I'm teaching on seniors and transitions come June. So
amazing.
I've been busy.
Yeah, I think you might be busier than I am, and you've certainly figured out Zoom better than I have. So, but let me tell you, I have actually gotten a lot of emails from seniors who are struggling a little bit because there are costs, obviously, that are increasing throughout this, whether it be the cost of food and other things, and they are looking for some additional support. What are you hearing from your friends or for yourself in terms of what else might be needed?
Well, certainly, seniors are generally speaking, in the vulnerable group. I mean, there's some of us that are doing just fine, but there's a lot of seniors that are living on the edge. Not only those in assisted living, but people that are living on their own in apartments, and they become part of kind of the invisible senior in our society. And it's important that we find ways of maintaining the connection with the people who become so easily invisible. And I think that more than economics, I think it's a question, Rosemary, of how we think of seniors and what role they have in our society. I think of our First Nations in Canada and what we can learn about the position of elders in their communities. I think in some ways we're dismissed seniors in our society. And I think we have to reinvent what we understand their role to be.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it's something that we've all sort of been exposed to through this in a tragic way in many cases, but I'm glad to see you giving voice to it as well. I think you do depend on a seniors center for some meals, if I'm not mistaken, and I wonder if you're still doing that or how you're coping with sort of practical parts of life, given that you're right, you are a more vulnerable part of the population for this pandemic, and leaving the house isn't even really the best idea either.
Well, the senior center is terrific. We go over there. I ride over on my bike with my backpack and pick up dinners and something for tea in the afternoon. And they're open from 11 to 2, and the prices are right. So it's a great service. And grocery stores are really stepping up too. We have a great delivery system from the grocery store here, so we get our groceries delivered right to the door, and that's a huge service.
That's great.
So practically, I think we're doing pretty well.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Other than a conversation about how we better value older Canadians in our society, is there something the government could do right now that would ease things a little bit for whether it's you or some of your friends financially?
Well, there's always a question about what kind of support the governments can give to seniors, and I think it's an ongoing conversation. I was a little concerned when the Prime Minister earlier was talking about years. I think we need to, the government and nonprofits maybe need to come together and have conversation about that question as to how we can support seniors in the society, because I really feel they need to be elevated in terms of how we view them and how we think of seniors. So some kind of, some have suggested a royal commission. I don't know about that, but I think we need to look at the overall picture. And another thing I think we need to recognize, this decision today comes belatedly, and that's very unfortunate. And we have to recognize that there's been a sacrifice made on the part of seniors and workers to bring us to this point. In fact, hundreds have died because of the lack of care or because of not being able to make enough money and having to move from care home to care home. So that sacrifice, I think, needs to be recognized in some way. It's a huge sacrifice.
It sure is. Don, what a pleasure to talk with you and hear about how you're coping with all of this. It sounds like you're doing very well, I must say, and I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, I think we are. Now, we have each other, and that's a huge plus. I think when you're on your own, it's a different issue. But there's so many ways now that you can be in touch with the world outside of yourself. I think some training in technology for some seniors is available at senior centers, but the more people we can get taking that, the better, because it certainly creates a contact with the world beyond yourself.
Well, that's great at 82 if you're picking all that up and doing that as a result of this. I must say I admire it a lot. Thank you so much, Don Robertson. Say hi to your wife for me, and we'll speak again. I appreciate it very much. Sir, stay healthy.
Thank you very much, Rosemary.
Okay, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Don.
Bye-bye.
Don Robertson in Vancouver. We are expecting, as I said, some sort of announcement from the federal government around seniors in the coming days. Not really sure what that will entail, but as you heard there from Don, definitely some holes that could be filled in for some of the older Canadians in society who are not necessarily in those long-term care centres, but are managing to live by themselves alone right now during a difficult time for everyone. We want to put a little bit of different news in if we can. It's also not great news, but anyway, officials in Newfoundland are in fact cancelling this summer's St. John's Regatta. This is not unlike what happened in Calgary with the Stampede. It'll be the first time in St. John's that this has been cancelled in some 80 years. So obviously a huge event in that part of the world. It draws many crowds, athletes, spectators, tourists, and the CBC's Chris O'Neill-Yates joins us now. And it is, of course, Chris, the crowds that would be the problem. But I'm sure people are very devastated, even if they expected this decision.
Absolutely. And I guess we kind of knew, but right now it's official. You know, the last time the regatta was canceled, we were at war. It was in 1940, and Newfoundland wasn't even part of Canada yet. So that's how long it's been. This would have been the 203rd right here on the banks of the Kitty-Vitty Lake. This event used to be done in the St. John's Harbor, and it moved here. And it's been one of those events where people got together. It used to be kind of like a townie, a St. John's event, but it's expanded beyond that. It's a great tourist draw these years, and some 50,000 people now show up every year. So it's one of those things that's part of the culture of St. John's. People come and they play games of chance. There's a lot of music. There's a lot of food to try. Some things that, you know, you're not eating every day. But nonetheless, it's one of those events. The sad part as well, the fact that it's going to, you know, result in less money coming into the economy, is that a lot of charities and organizations that raise money, you know, this is the biggest fundraising opportunity for them throughout the year. So the fact that this is canceled is going to leave them in a bit of a rough spot as well. So all around, it's a sad thing, but, you know, these are the times we live in. And, you know, this fellow here next to me is an emblem of exactly what's going on in the world right now and what's happening right here in St. John's. No regatta this year for the first time in 80 years. Not something anyone wants to think about, but here we are. These are the times we live in.
Okay, Chris O'Neill-Yates, sorry you had to bring us that bad news, but as we know, as you say, this is happening across the country, and I'm at least glad to see that it's not bad weather in St. John's today. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Rosie.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll bring you the COVID committee that'll be happening virtually. The Prime Minister expected to appear. Vashi Kapelas and Catherine Cullen will join me after this short break as well. I'm Rosemary Barton. We'll see you in just a minute.
For the latest coronavirus pandemic updates, breaking news, and top stories, download the CBC News app now.
capital. Thanks for joining us on CBC News Network and streaming wherever you might be right around the world, either on our app or CBC.ca. We're here, of course, as we are, tracking the top stories on COVID-19 in this country. Essential workers across the country, to be defined by the provinces, will be expected to see a slightly bigger paycheck. The Prime Minister says the federal government has reached a $4 billion deal to increase wages for quote-unquote essential workers. He says details of the agreement with the provinces are still being finalized, and the provinces and the territories will decide how the money gets spent. In other words, where the top-up actually happens. This is happening on the same day that Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan says that by the middle of May, more than 1,300 military personnel will be deployed in some 25 long-term care homes in Quebec. So that's nearly 3/4 of Canada's COVID-19 deaths are linked to seniors' residences. That is really the part of the country that has been hit the hardest. We'll bring in my colleagues in just a moment as we wait for both the public health briefing that we will usually get at the top of the hour here. We're not expecting any federal ministers there today because the vast majority of them either working or going to be part of this COVID-19 committee virtually, where they take questions from opposition parties about their response. And we will bring you that as well when the Prime Minister pops up for the first round of those questions. Let me bring in my colleagues, the host of Power and Politics, Vashi Capellas, and the CBC's Catherine Cullen in Ottawa. I did want to start off actually where I left last hour with my new friend, Don Robertson, who I'm hoping will invite me to some of his Zoom cocktail parties. And that is the seniors piece that we are still waiting to hear more about. And I think the last the Prime Minister said was coming days. And I wonder if we know anything more or what we speculate could be there in order to help some seniors who have been hardest hit. Vashi.
So here's what I'm looking for. And the Prime Minister, as you mentioned, Rosie, has signaled that it's coming in the coming days. So I was anticipating it as early as today, but I'm guessing it could happen sometime this weekend or perhaps tomorrow. Basically, how are they going to address particularly low-income seniors who are finding that they have additional costs because of sort of their needs and the market right now? So, for example, sometimes getting groceries is more expensive. The price of food has gone up a bit, but also being able to access that or even get there, that kind of thing. So and you're right, we are inundated with emails and tweets and messages from people who are really anxious to find out what exactly the government, and I mean they don't begrudge the help, for example, given to students, but they do wonder why it's taken a couple more weeks to get them some help. So as far as where that money might come from, the Prime Minister has indicated already that where low-income seniors are concerned, there is a GST credit available to them. I think $400, he said yesterday, for a single person, up to $600 for a couple. I wonder, does it come, for example, through the guaranteed income supplement? Will that perhaps get a boost, which is already addressing low-income seniors through the pension program, essentially? The leader of the Bloc Québécois has asked for pension programs to be expanded, for the money to come through there. I think the question is, how much money is it going to be? Is it going to be enough to make a difference? Who will qualify, and what program will deliver it? I don't have much doubt that there will be something. I mean, the Prime Minister has been pretty explicit about that. I think that, again, as I keep saying, I feel like all day, the devil will be in the details. It'll also be interesting to see if this is purely administered by the federal government or if there is some provincial collaboration alongside it.
Yeah, and it has been really the most vulnerable seniors, the seniors who are on old age supplements or the guaranteed income supplement, you're right, that might see top-ups. There have been, I think there's some requests for seniors who are better off, who have RSPs or investments, to find ways to give them a bit of a tax break if they need to pull any of that extra money out to support themselves during this time. So we'll see. I also thought it might be this week. We'll see. There's still one day left in the week, the work week anyway, so perhaps tomorrow. Catherine, let's just talk before we hear from Dr. Tam and Dr. New about the announcement today, because it is a big one. It's a lot of money, and it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds too.
Yeah, and I would say big picture, Rosemary, that both the discussion you're just having with Vashi about seniors and the announcement today, all of this, I think, is a little bit of a reality check, right? For so many days now, so much of the discussion has been about restarting provinces, reopening. Obviously, we know the situation changes from one province to the next, but today is a powerful reminder of some of the challenges facing seniors, facing long-term care centres, and facing the people who work in those centres. And we were talking earlier about the fact that this announcement today, a total of $4 billion, $3 billion that's coming from the federal government, another $1 billion that's expected to come from the provinces as they try to get money out the door to whomever the provinces deem essential workers. So we know in many cases we're talking about workers in long-term care centres, workers in the healthcare sector. In some cases, this may be as well people working in, for instance, grocery stores and whatnot. This is all a reminder of the fact that this is part of a bigger systemic issue that needs to be addressed, and that even as we talk about these questions of restarting and reopening provinces, there are some very acute problems. We talked earlier about the Canadian Forces increasing the number of soldiers that they're going to be making available in Quebec, going to new long-term care centres. Obviously, Quebec, again, a very acute case, the island of Montreal in particular and the surrounding area, but still a lot of major concerns that need to be addressed and dealt with. Earlier today, I actually saw an ad from the government of Quebec advertising their program, reaching out to low-income workers. So certainly some hope that there's going to be uptake for this because, of course, we depend so much on these people. We did before the outbreak. We maybe didn't think about it very much, but now we realize how much we depend on them, and we're asking them to put their health and safety in jeopardy.
Yeah, and so many people now just volunteering to go into those long-term care centers to try and help out in any way they can. All right, thank you both very much. I'm going to start, if I can, with our public health officials briefing us today on the national picture, and then we'll take you to the COVID committee when it gets underway. This is Dr. Teresa
63,895 confirmed cases, including 4,280 deaths. And over 28,000 cases, or 44%, have now recovered. Labs across Canada have tested over 1 million people for COVID-19 to date, with about 6% of these testing positive. In the past week, we've tested an average of over 25,000 people daily. As Mental Health Week continues, today's focus is on children and youth mental health. It's certainly not unexpected that kids will have lots of questions about COVID-19. Providing children and youth with information and extra nurturing can go a long way to offer reassurance and help to build up their resilience. Parents and caregivers can find lots of good tips to help kids and youth on websites such as the Kids Help Phone. Things like how to check in often, to communicate and share information, calm their fears, help them to practice online safety, and to engage in activities that can nurture mental and emotional health. As I said yesterday, talking things out can help to process our thoughts and lift the weight of our emotions, and this is as true for kids as it is for adults. And when you start the conversation and share your thoughts and feelings, it can help children and youth to open up and voice their own struggles. While kids may be missing their friends and other family members, maintaining virtual connections reminds us all that we are not alone. One thing that helps us all is the feeling that we are helping. A key way that children and youth help lift our spirits is through creativity and ingenuity. Their imagination is an inspiration. They have adorned windows with rainbow signs and messages for neighbors, friends, and essential workers. They've created virtual choirs, apps, and trackers. Reinforcing the positive energy of youth is a big step towards building resilience, not just for them, but for all of us. Thank you. Merci.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. As usual, I will start with the latest numbers on COVID-19 in Canada. There are now 63,875 confirmed cases, including over 4,000 deaths, and 28,000, or 44%, now recovered. Labs across Canada have tested over 1 million people for COVID-19 to date, and 6% of these tested positive. In the past week, we've tested, on average, over 25,000 people daily. As Mental Health Week continues, today's focus is on children and youth mental health. It is certainly not unexpected that kids will have lots of questions about COVID-19. Providing children and youth with information and extra nurturing can go a long way to offer reassurance and help to build up their resilience. Parents and caregivers can find lots of good tips to help kids and youth on websites such as the Kids Help Phone. Things like how to check in often, to communicate and share information, calm their fears, help them to practice online safety, and to engage in activities that can nurture mental and emotional health. As I said yesterday, talking things out can help to process our thoughts and lift the weight of our emotions. This is as true for kids as it is for adults. And when you start the conversation and share your own thoughts and feelings, it can help children and youth to open up and voice their own struggles. While kids may be missing their friends and other family members, maintaining virtual connections reminds us all that we are not alone. One thing that helps us all is the feeling that we are helping. A key way that children and youth help lift our spirits is through creativity and ingenuity. Their imagination is an inspiration, and they have adorned windows with rainbow signs and messages for neighbors, friends, and essential workers. They've created virtual choirs, apps, and trackers. Reinforcing the positive energy of youth is a big step towards building resilience, not just for them, but for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, doctors. We will now open the line to questions. Vous pouvez poser vos questions dans l'une des deux langues officielles. We ask that you limit yourself to one question and only one follow-up. For those asking a question in the room, we do ask that you make your way over to the freestanding mics. Operator, over to you.
Thank you. Merci. Our first question, notre première question, nous vient de Michel Lamarche avec TVA Nouvelles. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. Oui, bonjour, Dr. New.
Hello, Dr. New. I'd like to hear your comments on how well Canadians are following directives. Canadians have followed all the directives and advice and guidance since the beginning, as you keep repeating. But with new confinement directives, it's not clear in each of the provinces and from one province to the next, and sometimes from one region to the next. Do you feel we must be particularly vigilant with Canadians' adherence to these directives? Or do you fear that things will relax too much? Answer, thank you for the question.
Dr. Tam and
I think so. Dr. Tam and I are constantly discussing current issues with our provincial and territorial counterparts. Certainly, in each province and territory, as you said, the relaxing of public health guidelines is being done with great prudence. We agree with the fundamental principles. As each province and territory moves ahead, of course, one must continue good hygiene practices, keeping our social distancing, physical distance from others, washing our hands, and all the other public health measures, which, as you say, we keep reinforcing and repeating. But the implementation of these measures in each province and territories depends somewhat on the epidemiology. Even in each province, for example, in Montreal, the situation is far different from the situation in Lac-Saint-Jean. So we have to look at the epidemiology and what's going on the ground. Of course, the context of a large city will be quite different from what we see in a northern territory. But we're all on the same page, ultimately. And the plans that have been made public by various provinces and territories, it seems to me that they are still respecting the same fundamental principles. Now, the rate of change may be different from one province to another. So in some provinces, they've opened schools and others no. So these aspects may be a bit different. as long as we're just keeping an eye on the curve and the epidemiology, because of course what took place in British Columbia is different from what's currently going on in Quebec. So we're keeping an eye and everyone's on the same page, and I think Canadians understand quite well what all the public health authorities, not just at the federal level, but in each province and territory, are quite well aligned, in fact. Thank you. Follow-up question? My next question has to do with a very specific example of people who can't see their way through these new directives. People aged between 60 and 69 in Quebec who could go back to work in schools and in daycare centers and school buses, but we don't really understand why these people cannot see their own grandchildren.
The public health officials briefing today, they do confirm, though, that there have been now 1 million tests done in Canada for COVID-19, 6% of the population testing positive. But let's bring you to something else happening right now in the nation's capital. This is the Special Committee on COVID-19. That meeting is happening over video conference, as you can see there. On the very top left of your screen, you can see how many MPs have called in. 141 of them on video, 107 not wanting to show their backgrounds at this stage. This is interim Green Party leader, the House leader, Green Party leader, Elizabeth May, trying to make a point of order. This can be a little chaotic, but we will listen in for when questions start here to cabinet ministers. Let's listen.
She was also named by the...
I didn't recognize anyone. I don't know who's speaking, so I'll just start talking myself. I just want to remind the honourable members to have respect in their questions and in their answers. When you refer to someone, please refer to them respectfully. This is a committee of the House, and I would expect no less of the honourable members. We'll go on to the honourable minister who will answer that question. They have 16 seconds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I pointed out this morning in my press conference, we cannot move forward on a transformation of our energy sector without supporting the workers in that energy sector. We need their innovation. We need their hard work if we are going to lower our emissions, if we are going to reach our targets.
We'll go to Ms. Falk again.
Mr. Speaker, it has been 43 days since the Finance Minister promised Canada's energy sector liquidity through the Business Development Bank of Canada, and now for 43 days the Finance Minister has failed to deliver on that promise. These delays cost jobs, and they are costing us Canadian businesses. If the government doesn't step up to support our energy sector, they are in effect doubling down on their support for foreign, unethically sourced oil. Mr. Speaker, when will the credit options be available to Canada's small and medium energy firms?
I want to remind the honourable members that we do have interpreters who are listening and translating. So in consideration to them, please speak at a reasonable pace so that they can understand and then translate. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
From the very beginning, our priority through this pandemic and this crisis has been to support workers across the country. We have sent millions, billions of dollars to workers right across the country, including in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, in BC, in Newfoundland and Labrador, in the energy sector, to support them to be able to support their families through this difficult time. We're also working on sectoral supports right across the country, and those will be announced in due course. But our focus from the get-go has been helping families.
We'll go on to Ms. Falk.
Mr. Speaker, another group that has been ignored by the Liberals is our farmers. The announcements to date fall well short of what is needed to maintain a steady supply of affordable and healthy food. The Canadian Federation of Agriculture has asked the government for a $2.6 billion emergency fund. Instead of responding to the specific COVID-19 challenges, our farmers are facing the Liberals' re-announced $125 million that was already budgeted in the Agri-Recovery Program. Will the Prime Minister finally step up and take our food supply chain seriously, or is agriculture just an afterthought for him?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, we take agriculture and our agricultural sector extremely seriously, which is why we announced hundreds of millions of dollars a couple of days ago to respond to pressing needs. And we will continue to make investments to ensure both the safety of workers in our agricultural sector, safety of our communities, as well as the continued flow of high quality Canadian food onto our tables right across the country. Supporting the people who produce our food is a priority for this government and will continue to be.
Ms. Falk.
Well, Mr. Speaker, recycled program announcements do not respond to the immediate needs facing our farmers. This is absolutely unacceptable. Our farmers are faced with rising operational costs, a disrupted service industry, labor shortages, and a reduced capacity at processing plants. The government has a responsibility to take domestic food security seriously. When will the Prime Minister deliver adequate support to address the critical changes facing our ag industry?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I would suggest that respectfully that the honourable member take a look once again at the announcement we made, which actually highlights significant new investments to support our agricultural industry. I certainly agree that there is more to do. Every step of the way in this unprecedented situation, we've been moving forward on doing more, on adjusting, on investing more. We need to support our agricultural sector and the people who work so hard to put food on Canadians' tables right across.
Ms. Falk.
We will continue to.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians expect to find healthy and affordable food at their grocery stores. But if the government does not take action now, that's not a given. Our farmers are trying to keep Canadians fed while keeping their heads above water. The Liberal government's own failed federal carbon tax is weighing them down. It is an enormous hit to their bottom line, and the recent carbon tax hike is taking even more money out of the pockets of farmers at a time when they can afford it the least. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister exempt all farm operations from the carbon tax and reimburse the money that they have already taken from them?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's a shame to hear the member opposite accidentally, unintentionally, I'm certain, mislead the House and Canadians. The price on pollution actually puts more money into Canadians' pockets, and that includes farm families, people who make pay the cost of the price on pollution, on average, receive more money back. This is a way of creating a better future for our kids and grandkids, which I know that people in communities right across the country, including our farm communities, want to see happen. We are moving forward in a responsible way to put a price on pollution and put more money.
Nous allons maintenant continuer avec Madame Gill.
We'll now move on to Ms. Gill. Thank you, Mr. Chair. All sectors of the economy are fragile, and I'm thinking more specifically about the fishery. In the Magdalen Islands, we've got the lobster fishers on the North Shore, people fishing in Gaspé as well. Imports have stopped. There's also a drop in the domestic market because of the tourism sector, restaurants, etc. So we need to provide some assistance to fishers. What has the government done since the start of the crisis to support fishers? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Fishers do an exceptional job and are contributing to feeding Canadians and to our exports abroad. This crisis has hit them hard, and that's why we put in place money to support processors. We have made announcements to help fishers. We know that this is an unprecedented situation, a difficult situation. Ms. Gill, I thank the Prime Minister, but in fact what I'm asking for is assistance. He's talking about the $62.5 million for processors that will go to freezing the product. But I'm talking about the people doing the fishing themselves. The economic situation is such that fishers are facing health risks because we know that there are the issues. Physical distancing is difficult for them. So they have additional amounts they need to pay out in order to participate in their regular activities, their fishing activities, but at the same time, they're going to be facing a deficit. Because of the cost of resources, they're going to be running a deficit now. They are essential to the economy, the agricultural economy. Fishers, deckhands, and others, seasonal workers, don't know what the future holds. They don't know how they're going to put food on the table for their families next year. So will you be doing something else in addition to the 62.5 million? Because they've been facing uncertainty for a long time now, and they're very concerned. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. We will be making additional investments to support Canadians in a number of sectors. We recognize that fishers are facing challenges when it comes to physical distancing, the seasonal nature of their work in many cases, and we're going to continue to work with the industry to help fishers with communities in coastal areas so that people can have confidence in their capacity and in their future. It's important for the government to be there for people, and that is exactly what we're going to continue to do. This is an unprecedented crisis. And again, we can see that assistance is required, and we will continue to reach out and to help fishers and the fishing industry. Ms. Gill. It's a difficult crisis. We needed to be there from the outset. We know full well that several weeks went by. They need time to prepare for fishing activities, and there are many changes that could be, adjustments that could be made to current programs. When it comes to the size of the companies, for example, the $40,000 is something that could be helpful, but they don't have the payroll. The 75%, because of the dates, they can't qualify for that as well. So there are a number of solutions that I can share with the government and the Minister of Fisheries to come to their assistance quickly to help them. They want to participate in the crisis effort, but at the same time, they have no guarantees that they will have support they need. So I'd like a guarantee that they will be supported and that they will be able to, in fact, put food on their tables and to feed their communities, because the fishing industry is a major industry in their communities. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Since the outset, Minister Jordan has been working with fishers, with the industry, with communities that are affected by the crisis. We have put forth a number of solutions to support communities, to support their families. The situation is unprecedented, and from the outset, our objective was to help Canadians across the country in all industries, people who've lost their jobs. And we have done so. We will continue as well to work to help people who are facing uncertainty. That is what people expect of the government. Before we go to the next question, I'd like to remind members to speak slowly and to speak through the chair, not to speak directly to others. Thank you.
We'll now go on to Mr. Bacharach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, municipalities across Canada are facing a financial crisis. They've seen revenues plummet, and at the same time, the cost of delivering municipal services has risen. As the Prime Minister knows, municipalities are unable to run deficits, and so they are facing the reality of cutbacks and serious cuts to the services that Canadians depend on. We know that municipalities are vital during this time to provide services to Canadians, and they're going to be even more important during the recovery, especially when it comes to delivering on the infrastructure programs before us. FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and mayors across Canada have called for emergency financial relief for the municipal sector. And my question to the Prime Minister is when they can expect federal financial support to arrive.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no government in Canada's history has done more to work with our municipalities, with our cities, with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to respond to the challenges they're facing, to partner with them on things from infrastructure to investments that have made a huge difference right across the country in the quality of life of Canadians in towns large and small, from coast to coast to coast. But as I'm sure the member well knows, our Constitution requires that most of the funding for municipalities flow through the provinces. And we are working with the provinces as we continue to work with the cities to ensure that we're able to support this order of government that delivers the vast majority of services to Canadians with very little financial means. We know how—
We'll go back to Mr. Bacharach now.
We will continue.
Mr. Speaker, it would seem that the federal government has the fiscal capacity and the responsibility to help municipalities weather this crisis. Transit systems have been hit particularly hard and have seen the bulk of the layoffs in the municipal sector. These transit services carry essential workers to work, whether they're healthcare workers or grocery store workers, janitors, and others. The risk is that we're going to see higher fares to deal with this financial crisis. We're going to see service cutbacks precisely at a time when we want to be expanding transit and improving transit in our communities. Does the Prime Minister acknowledge that the federal government needs to step in and safeguard and protect Canada's transit services?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
This federal government recognizes how important it is to support all Canadians, which is why we've put forward unprecedented measures to help millions upon millions of Canadians with the CERB and with the wage subsidy. We will continue to work with the provinces who have jurisdiction over the municipalities. I'll be having a conversation with all other First Ministers tonight to talk about a broad range of issues. I can highlight that the issue of transit funding has come up and we have continued to engage with them. But again, Mr. Speaker, it is important to respect the Constitution and understand that funding for municipalities and cities does go through the provinces. The federal government is happy to be there to support, but it must
go on to Mr. Bacharach again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering how the Prime Minister could explain to a bus driver in Vancouver who has been laid off that as a public sector worker, she can't access the federal wage subsidy, while an equivalent worker in the airline industry gets to keep her job with the federal help of that program. Could the Prime Minister explain how that is fair?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I'm happy to explain to the member and to all Canadians that our Constitution creates federal areas of jurisdiction and provincial areas of jurisdiction. And the airline industry, like banking, like telecommunications, is a federal area of jurisdiction that we've been able to move forward on. But more than that, we've brought the the emergency response benefit and the wage subsidy to all industries across this country because it's something the federal government knew we needed to step up.
We'll go back to Mr.
In areas that are
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
They need to continue to do that.
I'd like to shift gears a little bit. Faced with minimal healthcare capacity, remote Indigenous communities in my riding are taking matters into their own hands. The Newhawk have put up a checkpoint on Highway 20 to protect community members and prevent non-essential travel, and in particular to protect the 3 remaining fluent speakers of the Newhawk language, these cherished elders in their community. The Haida on Haida Gwaii have set up a similar checkpoint, as have communities throughout British Columbia. Yet the federal support for Indigenous communities amounts to only $39 million for all of the Indigenous communities in BC. Does the Prime Minister not agree that more support is warranted to help Indigenous communities in my riding and across the country?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
From the very beginning, we made funds available to Canadians right across the country, particularly people in Indigenous or remote or northern communities who we knew were going to be facing more difficult challenges because of their existing vulnerabilities in their healthcare system and in socioeconomic circumstances. We have made unprecedented investments, and we will continue to make these investments necessary because we need to make sure that Indigenous Canadians and indeed all Canadians have the supports they need to make it through this crisis.
Maintenant, nous allons continuer avec M. Berthold.
We're going to continue on with Mr. Berthold. Mr. Berthold. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to deal with the area of jurisdiction that the Minister talked about and the incompetence of the Liberals to deliver infrastructure programs. And my question is to the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities. As the provinces are gradually reopening their economies, can the Minister tell us how many projects submitted by the provinces are currently awaiting for government's approval? The Honourable Prime Minister.
Le ministre.
Or the Honourable Minister.
Quelqu'un.
Somebody.
Est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un
Is there somebody who is on mute?
Qui doit répondre.
Who would like to answer the question? I hope that this time will not be taken off from my time. No, the clock has stopped. I think it's Ms. McKenna who's going to answer. I'm sorry, I was on mute. So, Mr. Chair, I'm very happy to see how well we're working with the provinces and the territories. I've worked and talked to all of my counterparts in the provinces and territories in relation to this historical program relating to infrastructure. We've worked very hard in my department to approve the projects, and we're going to continue to do so, and it's important that we continue. Mr. Berthold, well, we didn't have an answer. How many projects are waiting government of approval? I know that the Minister has been holding more and more virtual meetings, but there are still hundreds of projects awaiting approval from the Liberal government. Instead of waiting for the right political opportunity to unblock these files, will the Minister commit today to respect the provinces and approve all the projects that are sitting on her desk by next week?
Madame McKenna.
Ms. McKenna. Mr. Chair, I'm very happy to say how well we are working with the provinces and territories, that we are approving projects. And so if the member wants to speak with the provinces and territories, he'll see how well we're working together, and we're going to announce the projects because it's important for our economies and our communities, and it's important to create good jobs. Mr. Berthold, does the Minister understand that she hasn't told us how many projects are still awaiting, and that the construction season is very short, and that a project approval in July means that work cannot begin until next year, and so this will not help us to restart the economy? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Chair, I can clarify that we have approved hundreds of projects in the last weeks, and that we're going to work with the provinces and territories and municipalities, as well as Indigenous communities, to go forward with these projects. So we'll go back to Mr. Berthold. Mr. Chair, well, the Minister is talking about the green recovery of the country's economy. Public transit is in jeopardy. Social distancing measures will drive down the use of public transit for months to come. There's a study that the UMQ estimates that monthly losses are between $75 million to $100 million. Other countries have included public transit in pandemic relief programs. Why not Canada? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Chair, we recognize how important it is to support public transit. It's important for our economy because there are essential workers who use public transit, and we're working very closely with the municipalities and are listening to them. But as the Prime Minister stated, it's up to the provinces to help. Mr. Berthold, once again, we're saying that the puck is being passed on to the provinces, and the Minister isn't able to answer a question relating to the projects that are on the Minister's desk. And it's tremendously important to talk about the approval of these projects, especially in various large municipalities. And as we know, that there has been a reduction of of 80 to 90% in terms of ridership, and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, large cities and small communities across the country need help. Why is the minister ignoring the needs of the Canadian municipalities? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Chair, I can reassure the Member of Parliament that we're working closely with the municipalities, that we're listening to them to see what their issues are, how we can support them. But of course, we need help from the provinces and the territories. And as concerns the projects that have been approved, I will be happy to provide you with the precise number of all the projects that my department has worked on in the last weeks to approve those projects such that they can go forward. Mr. Chair, is there still time? No, that's it.
We'll now go on to Mr. Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This question is directed to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. On March 28th, he personally tweeted out a thank you to the People's Republic of China for donating PPEs to Canada. This tweet happened within 3 hours of China announcing that gift. Now, as it turned out, many of these PPEs were defective and could not be used. More recently, Taiwan donated 500,000 surgical masks to Canada. And yet here we are, 2 weeks later, and the minister has yet to personally thank Taiwan for its generosity. Will the minister now thank this free and democratic country for its generous gift to Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. Indeed, we are very grateful to every nation for helping Canada. This is a global pandemic which knows no border. We have been expressing our thanks to many nations who have contributed. We will continue to do so. It is important at a time of pandemic, Mr. Speaker, that we don't play politics, that humanity comes together. I can say to my COVID foreign minister's call, the world community has come together to make sure that we would make sure that supply chain would remain intact, that we would have transit hub, that we would have air bridges. And we will continue, Mr. Speaker, to work with every nation when it comes to health. This is a public good that we want to work together with.
We'll go back to Mr. Fast now.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear a thank you there, so I'm going to try again. On May 4th, the government of Taiwan delivered 25,000 surgical masks to the government of British Columbia. On hand were BC's Minister of Citizen Services, Ann Kang, and Minister of State for Childcare, Katrina Chen, who, as ministers, officially thanked the government of Taiwan for its donation. Again, will the minister now do the right thing and, on behalf of Canadians, recognize the generosity of Taiwan and thank its government for that timely donation?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said to you before, Canada is grateful to all who have given supplies to Canada. This is a common endeavor. We are thankful. We are grateful to every nation. We will continue to do so. Like I said, when it comes to global health, when it comes to helping each other, I think it is a duty for all to come together. And we are grateful and thankful for all those who have agreed to help Canada and Canadians from coast to coast to coast in times of need. And I've repeated that, and I've said that many times in many fora, Mr. Speaker, that we are grateful and thankful to all of those who are helping Canada.
Mr. Fast.
Well, no specific thank you to Taiwan again. The government of Taiwan has been the world leader in successfully fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have a lot to learn from them and their response. Sadly, the People's Republic of China continues to oppose Taiwan's membership in the World Health Organization. Will the minister now do the right thing and assure Canadians that he will fully support efforts to grant Taiwan membership in the World Health Organization?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member. As a former trade minister, he's very well aware of Canada's One China policy. That being said, Mr. Speaker, we support Taiwan continued meaningful participation in international multilateral forum, particularly when it comes to health, Mr. Speaker. This is a global good, and we want to support every nation, and we recognize that Taiwan and others have been doing very well in fighting this pandemic. We also believe that Taiwan's role as an observer in the World Health Assembly meeting is of interest to the international health community, and we have
We'll now go back to Mr. Fast.
Thank you. I'm going to pivot to repatriation flights. The minister has publicly said that over 20,000 stranded Canadians have been repatriated from abroad. Can he tell us exactly how many Canadians remain abroad that have expressed their desire to be repatriated?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to update members that as of today, we have repatriated more than 20,000 Canadians on 232 flights from 87 countries. And I would say this is Team Canada, Mr. Speaker. It knows no parties. Every member, or many members, I should say, have written to me to make sure that we take care. It's not an exact science. We have, like I said, repatriated thousands and thousands. We continue because we know there's still pockets of travelers, of Canadian travelers, which are stranded abroad. And as the Prime Minister and I have said from the beginning, we will use our best effort to repatriate everyone that wants to come back home.
We'll go on to Mr. Moore now. Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Canadians need to have faith in their justice system, even in time of crisis. My office has received correspondence from Canadians concerned that trial delays due to COVID-19 may result in criminals walking free. As this government has been working overtime to criminalize law-abiding citizens with new useless gun laws, will the Minister of Justice ensure that real criminals will not walk free due to delays in the justice system?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. We have been working, Mr. Speaker, with my provincial counterparts across Canada, as well as with the various courts, the federal courts, but also through my provincial counterparts with the superior courts and courts of appeal across Canada. Each particular jurisdiction has taken measures to ensure that a basic number of essential services within the court system are maintained through a variety of means, and we believe that we will
go back to Mr.
solve these various challenges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund was announced weeks ago as a way to help small and medium-sized businesses in rural communities like those in my riding. In Atlantic Canada, this was to be distributed to the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. This is yet another announcement with no details from this Liberal government. Can the minister clarify, are we days away or weeks away from this support flowing to the businesses that need it so desperately?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had the chance to talk with many of the chambers of commerce and business owners throughout Atlantic Canada, and we hear their anxiety. That's why ACOA is doing great work on the ground to make sure that we can help them through this very difficult period. Now, the member is right. We have increased the budget of ACOA. Good news. And I'll be coming up with the details very soon. And it will be a pleasure to collaborate with him to make sure that we can help many business and business owners across the Atlantic region.
Mr. Moore.
Oh, Mr. Chair, my office has had many small business owners that have reached out to me, and I know have reached out to many of my colleagues and probably all of us here today, who are frustrated by the eligibility requirements for some of the federal programs. In particular, they are unable to access the emergency business account because they do not have a payroll. And this could be like the hair salon in my riding who subcontracts out their chairs. There's hundreds and thousands of small businesses in this very situation, vital small businesses in our communities, but they do not meet this requirement. These businesses, many of them are weeks away from shutting down permanently. What does the Minister of Finance have to say to these small businesses that are suffering right now?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague for that really important question. And I want all the businesses that he is talking about and all of them throughout the country to know that we continue to work very, very hard to make sure that you are supported through this difficult period. So more work needs to be done, and we will continue to do that work. We know that businesses are being supported through getting access to the wage subsidy to keep their employees together. And they're getting help, whether it's rent or whether it's helping defray costs to keep their costs low by deferring GST and HST and customs duties payments. We're just going to continue to work with all of our businesses across the country.
We'll go to Mr. Moore with a brief question. I hope less than 20 seconds, please.
Well, Mr. Chair, it's a very specific issue. It's small businesses, thousands of them that do not have a payroll, or some who have a personal account rather than a business account that they've dealt with over the years, and that makes them ineligible. These businesses need help right.
The Honourable Minister, in 20 seconds or less, please.
I agree with the honourable member. Those businesses absolutely need the support from us. We're going to keep working to ensure that they are supported.
We'll go to Mr. Cummings next. Mr. Cummings.
Mr. Speaker, small businesses are concerned about their ability to survive, and no amount of deferrals, loans, subsidies can substitute their need to be open and servicing their customers. Can the government confirm that a sectoral risk analysis has taken place to assist the provinces in reopening the economy?
The Honourable Minister.
So, Mr. Speaker, I can assure the member that we've been very clear in terms of our strategy around reopening the economy, that we need to make sure that we follow the advice of the experts and the health authorities to do so in a manner that does not compromise the health and well-being of Canadians. We, of course, will have a sectoral lens, and as you can see by some of the initiatives and the support packages that we have put forward,
we'll go back to Mr. Cummings now.
Those sectors.
Mr. Speaker, thousands of business owners make a living and they utilize dividends as their salary. They also use independent contractors. Can the government confirm the current programs in place will be expanded for these hardworking Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to assure the honourable member that we continue to work with all of our small businesses, and I want to thank him for raising this very important issue. And I want to assure our Canadian small businesses that we are going to continue to do this work to make sure that you are supported.
Mr. Cumming.
Can the minister give me a date when they will be able to announce to these businesses that they will be eligible?
The Honourable Minister.
I want to assure our Canadian small businesses how important they are and the contributions that they make to all of our communities, and know that we continue to listen and we will ensure that they are supported and continue to be supported during this difficult time.
Minister, they need more than assurance. Can you give me a date when I can tell these thousands of businesses that they will be supported if they pay dividends or if they use contractors within their business?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, these businesses are absolutely important, and they are getting support through a range of means, and we will continue to work with these businesses to make sure that they continue to be supported through this difficult period.
Mr.
Okay,
Cummings.
we're going to pull away from the
Speaker,
COVID-19 virtual committee. There are about 300 people or so, 300 parliamentarians there asking some questions, initially of the Prime Minister, but then of other ministers. I'll bring in my colleagues, the host of Power and Politics, Vashi Kapellis, and the CBC's Catherine Cullen, both here with me in Ottawa. I'll maybe end on that last point, just because I know that you are you've been thinking about that a lot too, Vashi. The businesses who have dividends or contract work out. If you hire people to do work for your business, but they're not your employees. These are still problems within the programs that are available, and it didn't sound to me like the Minister of Small Business had much to offer there.
Yeah, and those have been persistent questions right from the start of this, when the government first announced what kind of financial aid they would be offering businesses. So these businesses in particular can't qualify for the emergency loan, they can't qualify for the wage subsidy, and they have been continually asking, is there anything you can do for us? And the Minister of Small Business, Mary Eng there, has talked in the past, and other ministers have referred them to, for example, access the CERB, so they'll get $2,000 a month. But while that may help in their personal circumstances, it doesn't do anything for their business. It doesn't help them, for example, when they have to pay rent. And so we have been hearing a lot from them for, I would say, almost 6 weeks now. There was no clear answer there from the minister on what can be expected. Melanie Joly at one point a couple weeks ago told me that the sort of regional development agencies, which she mentioned would be seeing an increase in budgets, could be the place for them to go. But again, there are no specifics on that. The other thing I want to flag, and I know this is something you've been following as well, is around municipalities. So municipalities have talked for a number of weeks now about the hit they're taking. They obviously are, their tax base, their means of revenue have been severely constricted. They're all facing, pretty much all the big cities and smaller ones too, actually, are facing huge budgetary shortfalls. They can't run deficits by law, 99.9% of them. And so they're asking for a $10 billion emergency fund from the federal government. The Prime Minister got a number of questions on that, and specifically around transit as well. The estimation from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is that public transit is losing $400 million a month, I believe, is the estimate. No clear answers from the Prime Minister if there would be help from the federal government for that. Provinces so far have jurisdiction over municipalities, but as the MP who was asking questions of the Prime Minister pointed out, I mean, provinces are in a bind right now as well. So I'm curious to see, I guess, as we move ahead, if in fact there won't be any help from the federal government. I'd be surprised if that were the case, because mayors have been telling us that their conversations with Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland have so far been encouraging, but they've asked for a huge chunk of change, and that they will eventually at the end of the year hit a wall when it comes to their budgetary deficits, and transit is going to be a big issue as economies reopen. People are going to have to get to their jobs, especially in larger centers, via that public transit. So no clear answers from the government on that either.
Yeah, and although it is you're right, obviously a jurisdictional issue, and that's what the Prime Minister kept saying in his answers, there is the gas tax fund, which allows the federal government to funnel money to municipalities for infrastructure and things like that. So it's not as though it couldn't be done. It's just when you do it, how much you do it, and how that would actually work. Catherine, anything stood out for you there?
Yeah, well, picking up on that point, I did think it was interesting seeing it is perhaps to some extent, given how vocal BC and John Horgan have been about this issue, it was not necessarily a surprise to see an NDP MP from BC raising this question, but it was also interesting to see the Conservatives chiming in. Luc Berthold also saying that he had questions specifically for Catherine McKenna around infrastructure and transit. So interesting to see the push across party lines there, but I thought the most interesting exchange really was the one between Ed Fast and François-Philippe Champagne about Taiwan. Maybe that's not necessarily an issue that's on the minds of all Canadians, but Mr. Fast really pushing the Foreign Affairs Minister there, saying, can't you just say thank you to Taiwan for these masks? We saw it was clear the Foreign Affairs Minister did not want to say the word Taiwan in the first few answers. Obviously, Canada is in a bit of a sensitive situation here. Even before this outbreak, there was a lot of tension with Canada and China relating to the detention of Meng Wanzhou, and now, of course, these two Canadians, the Michaels, who are still languishing in China, but also now an added layer of Canada's dependence on China to get personal protective equipment. So a very politically sensitive situation, and the Conservatives really sort of poking at François-Philippe Champagne there, trying to draw him out on this issue.
Okay, thank you for highlighting that too. All right, Vashi Kapelis, you can see her on her program later tonight at 5 Eastern. Catherine Cullen, she will be everywhere and at anywhere you want to see her. Thank you both very much for your help with our coverage. Appreciate it. Just remind you that the primary announcement from the Prime Minister today was really about trying to boost the help, the salaries, the wages of essential workers in this country. $4 billion to try and do that between the federal government and the provinces. More information to come from provinces. We want to leave you now with the scene that took place just a little bit ago in Quebec City. That's the Snowbirds taking off a short time ago. They're continuing their tour of Canada to honor frontline workers and give us maybe a most needed boost as well. I'm Rosemary Barton. Coverage continues here on CBC News Network with Andrew Nichols.